if the country has managed to recover the 217 million pieces of the old 1,000 shilling notes, and of course with regards to the demonetization exercise that ended a few days ago. Let's listen in.
Becomes legal tender through, at least for us here, through a gazette notice, according to specific legal mandates by the central bank, and consequently, it also loses its value as currency, meaning as legal tender, again by the same process, which is what we followed in this case. Now, again, as preliminaries, demonetization is done for a variety of reasons. And in our case here, there were two reasons that we put out, which is we needed to deal with the usage or rather to deal with the illicit cash flows, the illicit financial flows in Kenya and other countries that we had already seen, and some emerging, and a lot of them, or some of them, were using the Kenya currency as their currency of choice. Also, they were using the US dollar as a currency of choice. But those two, so we needed to deal with it. And I think you have, through your various investigations, some of you have actually raised some of these issues, maybe just saw them and walked away. But anyway, they deserve investigation, not just by you, but in particular by the law enforcement agencies. That was one issue. The second one was we also saw the emergence of counterfeiters, and the banknote of choice was the 1,000, the old series. And I think a lot of you have also seen that in the newspapers. There's been reports about counterfeiters that have been caught, and so forth. So we needed to deal with that conclusively, and the blow that was struck was the withdrawal of those currency, of those old bills, as I mentioned a moment ago. It's interesting that some of us may ask questions, but it's interesting that this message has gone to the farthest corners, understanding why is it that we are doing this, the reason for it. Are we just doing this to destabilize your financial position or whatever else it is? Absolutely not. And a good way of, I was in Lunga Lunga, the farthest corner towards Mombasa, towards Tanzania, in Kwale constituency. And in the market there, when we had our road show, a lady told me, in the crowd, and she speaks and said, "Usiregeshe kamba." I hope that doesn't need translation. Basically, she fully understood the benefit that she, a trader in Lunga Lunga, would benefit, or conversely, was losing and would actually it would be detrimental to her if actually the procedure, or let's say the demonetization, was not successful. So in that sense, it was extremely important, and I think for a lot of us who have even more data would appreciate that even more. But let's move on. Now, in designing the demonetization strategy, we look keenly at the experience of other countries. We wanted to learn from them. So please make no mistake, we didn't just wake up in the morning and decide we are going to do X or Y or Z. It was actually a quite detailed examination and appreciation. Now, there are two general approaches to demonetization. One is a sort of, you want to call it a shock approach, where you demonetize overnight. And you generally do this. This happens, for instance, when there are significant dislocations in the economy, right? We can discuss the examples, but in the interest of time, I'll breeze quickly through this. And the other one is a more gradual approach, which the point here is to minimize the disruptions to the economy, and also to enhance the effectiveness in addressing the the end point, the objectives, that is in our case corruption and indeed money laundering or tax evasion, if that's what you have in mind when you institute the demonetization. So, and we actually looked very carefully at the more recent examples, and the one that obviously all of you have talked about is the example of India. Somehow we've all focused on the example of India, but as I have said, and I mentioned this before, we did have a very detailed look at that. And I guess also most commentators remain traumatized by that example. Anyway, we did look at that example very carefully. I would also say that the governor of the Reserve Bank of India, who was there when they instituted this, is somebody I know very well. We went to the same school. He was a year ahead of me. He is Kenyan, believe it or not. Now maybe he's changed his passports, but and we have had I had a lot of conversations with him. So not only the written material, but we also had a lot of let's say intimate understanding of what happened there. Okay, let's move on. Most commentators obviously on this, when you look at the Indian example, there are a few things that come up. The first, of course, is that it was an immediate sort of process, immediate demonetization with 2 months to change from the now non-currency to something that you can use for transactions. And also there were the long lines. I think this was carried in the various media stories, pictures of long lines, a bit like ourselves when you go voting, you know, long lines snaking around the neighborhood and all that. There was also problems that popped up, you know, people buying the old currency, what was the old currency at a discount. AML, CFT, this is anti-money laundering, sort of measures were not fully deployed. So there are some specific concerns that one saw. What were the lessons? From our perspective, it was clear that the immediate withdrawal, that's the shock approach, dislocated transactions with potentially large economic effects. And this is why we went the gradual approach, right? And also, remember we were doing this at a time when we were introducing a new currency. So it was important to also be aware as to what will happen, you know, in terms of public appreciation of the new currency and things like that. The other thing that was important, that another lesson from this is that there should be enough cash. So you should not get to a point where you are running out of banknotes, you know, and then it undermines your demonetization. That's how you end up having long lines. That's how you end up having problems at the ATM and things like that. Another point, a third point, is that there was a need for a strong anti-money laundering, combating of financing of terrorism, acronym AML, CFT, measures, a framework that is deployed, not just on the books, but actually one that is operating. And finally, number 4 is a very strong communication strategy, very strong. Not just a strategy, but actually implement a very strong communication stance. So if you look at what we did, all these elements were there. So in a sense, these lessons were part of our appreciation. And from day one, we had this in mind. Now, there are questions, of course, that some of you asked. We gave it 4 months, and some of you have asked, well, was 4 months enough? Or could we say, or was it too much? Maybe we should have done 2 months. Maybe we should have done 3. And this is where there is a balance, okay? So we had to strike a balance between being overly generous for the common mwananchi, Wanjiko, allowing a lot of time there for them to convert, and on the other side, providing too much room for illicit transactors to, say, go around the fences that you're trying to, or the measures that you're trying to put in place. So it's really a balance, and we struck the balance at 4 months, and I think that is what you can see in the well, that's what was announced, and so forth. How can I then explain the background? I'm sorry, I'm still going on the background because it is important. And here I would ask, I will not name names, but be patient, please. Let's do a good job. Let's start from the start and go to the end. So this doesn't appear like, where's the meat? Where's the substance? Please be patient, because this is substance. I don't want us to have questions about how we did things. So that's why I'm belaboring these points. Okay, let's move on. How did we proceed? So now this is the process part. We've already dealt with the ideas, what was there, and what underpinned the demonetization, but how did we progress? And I think here is where we had a multi-layered strategic approach. It's important to appreciate that. It is a strategic approach, so it wasn't random, but it is multi-layered. And then we executed it with a lot of vigor and precision. That's what I would say. So you begin with a very deep bench, for those of you that like sports, particularly basketball. You have a deep bench. You don't go with one, you know, if it is basketball, just having 5 people. No, no, no. You want to have actually 14. And any one of them, you can bring them in. So that's a multi-layered approach. And it is strategic. You have a plan. You have a game plan. You know, you have, for this drive, you know what you're doing. It's not just a random moving in the field. That was the first thing, multi-layered strategic approach. The second element, so we executed it with vigor and precision. The second element of this was extensive and regular feedback. It was essential to get feedback. So we didn't just roll it off and then just wait for the outcomes. We were getting feedback, and I think some of you have already seen how some of the feedback was coming. And then we had a tactical response to what was going on. So the feedback comes, and then we have to respond tactically, putting the right measures in to deal with that issue or that problem, or when we see that a particular measure is getting a lot of traction, then giving it even more energy so that we can get all directed to the objectives that I mentioned before. All right, so let's move to so when we started off then, priority number 1, obviously, so I'll now talk about, to sort of give some details on this. Priority number 1 was to make sure that everyone is aware of the new banknotes. Remember, we were issuing new generation banknotes, aware of them, and also the security features. So that was priority number 1. And as you can imagine, we started off through, let's say, on TV, on that very day, on social media and things like that. We'll come back to that in detail. The second priority was to make sure that the banknotes are widely available, including, of course, recalibrating ATMs, and so that they can actually provide the cash, the new generation banknotes. Obviously, this was done over a period of time. It doesn't happen sort of at the push of a button. We need to provide the data to the people that take care of the ATMs and so forth, and they have to go ATM by ATM. It's a bit lengthy, but that was second priority. And then the third priority was pushing awareness of the security features. You have to continue pushing this. And the withdrawal. And we did this in a layered manner, right? So culminating with heavy presence in the airwaves, radio that is, in the vernacular stations, radio stations.
And that is Central Bank of Kenya Governor Dr. Patrick Njoroge giving an audit on the switch to the new generation